guest, Mark Wilson from UCAS. Mark will be addressing Understanding UCAS, how to support students applying to UK universities. Mark is responsible for the development of the UCAS international strategy, coordinating activities across international, customer, and stakeholder engagement, marketing, product, and service development from an international perspective. With over 15 years experience in international admissions and student recruitment, partnership development, and broader internationalization projects, Mark held senior international posts at several universities in the UK prior to taking up his current position at UCAS in June of 2015. Mark, we really appreciate your time today and thank you for joining us. Please take over.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be presenting a webinar to colleagues from IECA. This is the first time I think that UCAS has worked with the Independent Education Counsellors Association. Hopefully I've got the acronym right, so really excited to present to you, to meet all of you via this webinar as well. So today's session is going to look at how you can support your students who are applying to the UK. So I'm going to talk through how that works. So UCAS is right at the centre of UK higher education applications, and I'm going to introduce us and talk a little bit about how the UCAS system works. And I'm very aware from earlier conversations with IECA colleagues that many of you will be experts in the US system. So I'm going to try to call out some of the differences to help you sort of understand and get a perspective on the UK system a little more by comparing to other systems you might be a bit more familiar with. So I've got a few slides to talk you through, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. And I've got a lot of detailed slide links at the end, which give you further resources, which I'll show you very briefly, but hopefully when the slides are circulated, you'll be able to access those and look into stuff a little bit more. But let's kick things off in terms of who we are at UCAS and what is it that we do. Well, UCAS is a central organisation that we've been around since 1993, but the whole concept of having a shared admissions service has been around in the UK for much longer. So universities have worked together since the early 1960s in different ways of a centralised admissions service for all applicants. A lot of people who we meet internationally tend to think we must be some part of a Department for Education, or perhaps owned by the universities that we work for. That's not the case. We're not a government agency. We're completely independent, and we are set up with charitable status. So we're a non-profit organisation. And to give you a sense of how big our operation is, every year we deal with about 700,000 applicants. So you can see here some of the headline figures from 2018, the last admission cycle. So of those 700,000 or so, about 80% are UK students, but we've got a good proportion, just under 20%, who apply from outside the UK. And we're very much a service which tries to meet the needs of all of those applicants, the schools and colleges supporting them, the advisors and independent counsellors who are working with those students. Right, so what I wanted to do now was just give a bit of an idea to you all about the shape and the structure of the UCAS application process. So this is very much giving you an introduction, so please excuse me, those of you that will have used the UCAS process previously and know a little bit, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Our main undergraduate application process goes by the name of Apply, and it's entirely an online service, and the centralized shared admission service element comes in in terms of some of the ways that we work, which we've agreed with the university sector. A big part of that is that students are restricted in the number of choices of university course they can apply to. And again, this is something that the universities have asked us to implement within our process. So within UCAS Apply, it's a maximum of 5 choices that an applicant will have. Now, there are a couple of areas where there's a bit of a nuance to that choice restriction. So if you're applying to medicine, veterinary science or dentistry, these are very competitive courses, and to help those institutions offering those programs be more efficient in the way they manage the ratio of applicants to places available, they've asked us to limit the choices to 4 only. And similarly with Oxford or Cambridge, applicants have to choose one or the other. They can't apply to both. One of the things that we have been very focused on for a number of years is keeping the cost to the applicant, so the student cost, as low as we can. So we've not changed the application fee by more than £1 or so year on year, and for many years we resist any kind of change. So for the 2019 cycle, the figures are slightly different, but to give you an indication of the kind of level of application fee that students pay, if a student applies just to one university, they pay £18, but for more than one choice, it's a slightly higher fee of £24. And no student will ever pay more than £24 if they're applying to UK universities through UCAS. So that's the absolute maximum that anybody will pay, and it's the same whichever university they choose as well. Within the 5 choices, we operate to a system which goes by the sort of working title of equal consideration. This means that there's no ranking of preference order when a student completes the application. They may have a favorite in their heart, but they don't actually indicate on the application, this is my first choice university, second choice, third choice, and so on. And the universities similarly will all consider them at the same time, and will agree that as long as the student has met the equal consideration deadline, that they will pick from the best out of the pool of applicants that they get. So it's not a kind of first come, first serve, or multiple kind of rounds of applications. Linked to that, we also operate an invisibility principle within the application. And by this I mean that the universities will not know until they've made a decision on the application which other universities the student has applied for. So it's a centralized system, it's a shared admissions process for efficiency, but each university has to treat the application that they receive on its own merits. And we don't allow the universities to second guess what they think an applicant might do. You know, so they can only see the application has come to them until they make that admissions decision. The other element to the structure that UCAS's Apply system gives to university applications in the UK is that there's a very fixed time frame for applications. And these are the dates that are relevant for when students apply for 2020 start, but it's more or less the same point in the month each year, and the same May, September, October kind of milestones or deadlines within the cycle. So as an example, just to start you off, for those students applying for 2020 entry, from the 21st of May 2019, UCAS undergraduate apply opens, and by this we mean that all of the courses that are available in autumn 2020 We've published those courses on UCAS.com. Students can register their profile. They can start completing the online application, and they can make their choices through searching the UCAS search tool. But it's not until early September that they'll actually be able to start sending those applications and getting decisions back from the universities. So the universities want to finish the 2019 intake before they move on to the 2020 recruitment window. And then you see there's a few deadlines that come up. Now the 15th of October is our early deadline, and this is for those courses that have a particularly lengthy selection process, which might entail tests, interviews, and so on. So that's the kind of specialist programs in medicine, dentistry, and the Oxford and Cambridge courses that will work for that 15th of October deadline. But nearly every other university will work to two other deadlines. One will be the 15th of January, and this is the equal consideration deadline. It's not a hard deadline. Students can still apply after this deadline. However, it's the latest point at which a university is obliged under the UCAS system to give equal consideration to all applications. So if, for example, you've got a very, very selective program with lots more applications than places, they probably fill the course from the 15th of January applications. But there's probably 90% of courses are not in that category, and they'll continue recruiting till 30th of June, which is the last date for the main applications. And the students are not pressured in terms of that January timeframe. But for, like I say, for very prestigious universities, for more competitive courses, it is a 15th of January deadline that's the best one to advise your students to aim for. So some of the universities like LSE, Imperial, UCL, and so on, very high-ranking universities, will probably fill a lot of their courses by the 15th of January. There's one other thing here, which is the 25th of February date, which I mentioned, which is when a part of the process called Extra opens. Now, I won't explain this in a lot of detail, but essentially I mentioned before there are 5 choices that a student can make within the UCAS system. If they apply to 5 choices but are not successful with any of them, or if they get 3 rejections and 2 offers, but they realize that it was their 4th and 5th choice and they're not that keen on accepting those offers, we run a system called Extra from 25th of February until early July, and a student can reject or decline rather all of their offers and then apply for 1 extra course at a time until they receive an offer that they are happy to keep. So that's another part of the process to give a bit more flexibility to students. You can see here the online application form, the kind of 8 main sections that are required from university applicants. We embed video and help text in the application so that as students go through, they can get help completing it. If some of you are very new to supporting students applying to undergraduate study in the UK, go on to UCAS.com, register yourself as a student, and just try out this application. As long as you don't press pay and send at the end of the application, then nobody from a university will see it. UCAS will delete your draft application at the end of the cycle, but it gives you a chance to work through so you can see each of the questions that your students will be asked, and you can work out how best to advise them to kind of complete that. I come on to the personal statement in a bit more detail later, but it's worth pointing out that points 7 and 8, the personal statement and the reference, it's the same document that will go to each of the university choices they apply to through UCAS. So they write one personal statement for their application, and UCAS sends that personal statement to all 5 choices. And similarly, each of the 5 universities that the student applies to will see the same reference. So the tutor only writes one reference for the whole application. So really, just to reflect a little bit on how that might differ from some of the US focused application processes that I'm sure many of you are very experienced in working to. Obviously, there are some similarities with a system like the Common App. Instead of 10 sections, there are 8 sections, but the student has to sort of write something herself or himself, whether it's a personal statement or supplemental essay questions. I think the key kind of thing that applies here is that the UCAS system is much more consistent for all universities. There's not really a great deal of variation from university to university. I mentioned Oxford, Cambridge, medicine and so on have an October 15th deadline and a slightly different process. But other than that, the vast majority of universities all work to this same standardized application process that is offered by the UCAS apply system. Oxford and Cambridge and medicine courses, these will require admissions tests. There are a handful of other courses that will also require some kind of subject-specific admissions test, but otherwise it's pretty much a standard application process. And similarly, I mentioned before that the fee is the same for any applicant, whichever university they've chosen. I know that is something we hear from international school counsellors that makes it quite different from applying to US universities and colleges, which may have a wide range of different application fees that each different one charges. But here you've got the 2020 figures written in here. So a student applying for next year, they will pay no more than £20 or around $26 US for making one choice, and £25 or $32 US for more than one choice. And as I mentioned before, it's the maximum that a student will pay. So some really critical differences around that consistency and standardized process and fee that the students pay. So once the student has submitted that application, universities and colleges take a look at the applications that come through. Now, some of them will wait until January the 15th and kind of respond to all of the applications that they get at that time once the window is closed. Others will know how many places they can offer out, and we'll start working on the applications as soon as they come in. However, applicants are advised to wait for all of their decisions to come back from each of the choices they've made, and they will probably hear back. If they're still studying, the most likely offer they get is conditional. If they've already graduated from high school, they've got all their exam grades and so on, they may get an unconditional. Or if they've not sort of made the grade for that particular university course, they'll be rejected or be given an unsuccessful outcome. But once they've heard back from each of their university choices, they can essentially then start to decide what they want to do. Now, they can take up to 2 of those offers that they get. So they can accept a firm offer and an insurance offer. And you can see, as you can see, the insurance, as the name suggests, is usually one that has got lower grade requirements or entry criteria in case they have a bad day on exam day or something like that. But it's not obligatory for a student to accept the insurance choice. But once they've they've taken on any of these offers, they need to decline any other offers they get. They can't sort of keep a number of other offers in their pocket. They have to either take a firm or an insurance offer. And this is what the student will see once they have completed the application and submitted it. We have a tool for students to follow the progress of their application after submission. We call that Track, and a student will log in using their personal ID and the password they've set for themselves. And you can see that the Track system has got a few different tabs there. You can see underneath Welcome Back Rebecca, it will show waiting for offers, reply to offers, waiting for confirmation, and so on. Track opens automatically to show a student what stage they're in and what they need to do next. So if they haven't heard back from all 5 of their choices, they'll open up on the Waiting for Offers tab. As you can see, Rebecca, back in 2013, she had received all of her decisions. So when she next logs into Track, she would have seen the Reply to Your Offers tab. And you can see there as well, the Next Step section gives it a very clear indication of what the student has to do, what the relevant deadline is for making that response. So we get feedback from students and their advisors. They find this is a quite straightforward part of the system for students to use, but it's hopefully very, very, very clear for people as to exactly what they need to do at any point when they log in. So really, as I mentioned before, the application process itself is very much a simple, straightforward, standardized process that can be boiled down to these 10 steps. And you can see they're color-coded to show you what the applicant does, what the supporting school or college that the student is leaving will do, UCAS's role in the middle there around processing the application, sending it on to the provider, and then the universities, making their decision and informing the student via UCAS's Track service. We get lots of feedback from international schools where counsellors are supporting students to the UK, to Australia, to the US, to Canada, and so on. And they really give us very positive feedback about the UCAS system in comparison to some of the other systems for that very fact of its simplicity and consistency. Whoever the student is applying to, the application process works the same way. I think once you've got to know it, that's very much the case. I hope that for those of you who have less experience, I hope it's something that you'll be able to recognise as being a useful tool for your students when they're applying to UK universities. So just to flag then, what is it that UK universities are looking for? And this is really in a kind of comparative sense, thinking about what universities in other countries might be looking for as well, particularly as we understand US universities and colleges, what they look for from applicants. Generally speaking, UK universities take into account a number of factors from the application. I think the first 3 on this bullet list here, the personal statement, reference and qualifications, they are without doubt the most important elements. Probably qualifications first, then personal statement, then reference. The grades that a student gets will be incorporated into the application through their teacher giving a prediction of any pending grade. So they'll say what they expect the grade to be, and that's something that universities take quite seriously when they're weighing things up as well. Other universities I mentioned before, they're in a minority, but some will also have an admissions test they ask the student to look at. An even smaller number will also interview students, and for performing and creative arts courses, there may be portfolio and audition. Now the universities all have complete autonomy to set their own criteria, to set their own policy and process around admissions. So it's not something that UCAS has any role in setting. And also there isn't for international applicants, there isn't a national UK agreed equivalence for qualifications from other countries. There's guidance which suggests that the equivalent level for US high school graduate to UK secondary school graduate might be this, but it's not so much a mandated thing. Universities can still decide whether they want to, how they want to view that criteria. Now, for each of the universities who list their courses and make them available to apply to through UCAS, UCAS.com, our search facility, has a detailed course information page where you can see exactly what criteria apply to the specific course. However, that is normally expressed in A-level grades, which are the most common UK qualification for applicants to university. But there are some courses listed by universities where they've developed more information. So we give them the space to write as much as they like on that. And some universities will also have country-specific criteria. Now, I'm just going to pause just a second here. I believe somebody has sort of raised their hand to ask a question, which I guess must be pertinent to this particular bit. Is there somebody that had a particular question here? You can feel free to unmute yourself and pose that question right now. Otherwise, we can pick it up at the end. Is it Lisa Temkin? Yes. Hi there.
Oh, I have questions. This is Julie Gross. For the extra core, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi there, Julie.
Oh, yes, thank you. For the extra course, since you apply for one extra course at a time, can you then customize the personal statement for that particular school?
Oh, that's a great question. No, unfortunately you can't. You just forward the same existing application to the additional school or schools that you apply to.
Thank you. And then my other question is, in your example that you had in a previous slide, where it was welcome back, Rebecca, and it said reply to your offers by June 6th. So is that the date that all applicants would reply, or do different universities have different reply dates?
The date would be consistent for UCAS applicants, but the date that they're expected to reply by will change depending on when they submitted their application. So the universities don't set their own response deadline, but rather than sort of give you the full range of details on when the student would need to reply, there are a couple of different points which the UCAS system sets the deadline, but it's reflected on that track page when a student logs in.
Thank you very much.
Not a problem at all. So I'm just going to move on just to illustrate a couple of the things that I said about the entry criteria there. So yeah, this is an example listing. I chose a university at random, University of Birmingham, quite well known. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. And history and political science, slightly less random. These are the two most popular topics with US students applying to UCAS. So you can see the box on the left gives you a view of the basic description of the program. And then if you were to scroll down on that course search page, you can see the qualification requirements here are listed in quite a lot of detail. It gives you that A-level, Pearson National Diploma, which is a slightly more vocational kind of type of program offered in UK curriculum terms, and then a couple of the more well-known international curricula, so Cambridge and IB. And you can see the entry criteria very clearly specified there. When it comes down to entry criteria which are even more specific to US students, I've kind of looked at those UK universities that receive the most applications from the US and tried to give you a sense of what their typical entry criteria might be. Now, typical is a word to be sort of used slightly cautiously here, because a lot of US students choose quite high-ranking universities. So this is sort of quite typical, but also quite demanding type criteria that are specified here. And the requirement might be for something like 3 advanced placement courses with a grade 4 or above, or SAT subject tests at 650 plus. So again, it's 3 of those that universities would look for. That can vary quite widely, as I've said, though, and other UK institutions will not set the bar so high. They might ask for something like a high school diploma GPA 2.8 and ACT 24 plus or above, rather, and that would be grades that a student could be hitting and still get into another type of university in the UK. But often what you'll see is that with US qualifications, the UK universities will be quite flexible, will look for different combinations of the standardized tests, and they'll accept those in ways which they may specify in quite a lot of detail. But just a couple of things to sort of be wary of. You know, the UK degree curriculum is quite narrow and specialized, so there's often a requirement that students will have studied some prerequisites before. And also this approach that we've been hearing a little bit about in terms of moves within the US university admissions process and system to a kind of more test optional approach, where students may not be taking some of these standardized tests. That might be something that's becoming more common in the US, but it's not hugely consistent with the UK admissions requirements. And by this, I mean, you know, there's a lot of emphasis put on the academics by UK institutions. When you've got students that are starting to pick out particular universities in the UK they're really interested in, I think the UCAS website is a starting point where they've got a comprehensive search tool to help them identify exactly where those courses that they're interested in are available. But once they really want to start getting into the detail and get under the skin of what it will take for them to get onto that program, this is where they need to really look at university websites, and you can help them with this, searching under things like international students or your country section. Use search terms like international entry criteria, and you get those really detailed, specific entry criteria expressed in terms of the qualifications your students have. And you know, I did a trial run on about 10 universities that recruit quite good numbers of US students, and all of them I found relatively easy using that kind of approach, what the exact requirement from a US background would be. And just to sort of give you an example of just how much detail some individual universities work up on their website. Now, this is a sample equivalence table mapping the equivalence between A-levels and US qualifications at the sort of upper end of the range of grades available in A-level terms, certainly. Now, this, you can see the source is listed here. It's from Durham University's website, and you know, that's quite a demanding university to get into. So you know, you can kind of see those equivalences mapped out in terms of APs, SATs, and so forth. And just to reiterate here that this is very much Durham University's admissions policy. It's very much their interpretation of equivalence, and it's not something which is necessarily going to be exactly the same in terms of equivalences set by other other universities.
Could I ask a question?
Of course, yeah. Is that Lisa?
No, I have
No,
a question though too.
Sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Eileen. My question is, in California, at least where I am, many students are choosing to take dual enrollment at a college or a community college rather than APs.
Mm-hmm.
How do the UK universities look upon those as substitutes for APs?
Now that's a good question. I wouldn't want to sort of speculate too wildly on that. It's a relatively new one on me in terms of, you know, the universities I'd looked into do have quite a lot of detail on the variations and different combinations of qualifications they'll take, but I didn't pick up too much on you know, from universities who are specifying very high scores in APs and SAT subject scores and so forth. They didn't necessarily specify what they'd look for from a community college grade profile. At the other end, I did sort of see that there were some universities, you know, perhaps a little in a different part of the league tables and the rankings and so forth, who did say, you know, the equivalence of 1 year or 2 years at community college, you know, that also meets entry criteria for some of the courses. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a certain type of university that is more open to that type of background, but it might mean that those universities are a bit more flexible. I think with universities who recruit quite heavily from the US, places like St. Andrews, Edinburgh, Bristol as well, I think Durham too gets its sort of fair share of US students. There are a large number of applications. I think they do tend to be quite focused on the academic background, but they nonetheless do have a very fair policy of trying to treat each applicant on their individual merits. So I've said a lot without necessarily answering your question, Eileen, though. But it's halfway between. I think there may be a preference for the more academic courses, and it would be a case-by-case basis for the university and the applicant.
Okay, so what I heard you say is that to play it safe, you should take students thinking about applying to the UK and they're debating between AP or dual enrollment for a specific class. It's best to have them do AP because that's what's expected in the UK.
I think each university in the UK would typically have got to the point now. UK higher education is very internationalized, a lot of international students coming in. So there's been a lot of work in the last 5-10 years or so that UK universities have done to look at the profile of students that have come in from overseas and their attainment at later stages of their education. And they've developed that into quite detailed guidance they give to new applicants. So I think it's worth checking in advance with the university, the kind of universities that you know would be popular with your students, and just seeing what their policy is on that, because each individual university will have that autonomy, but because they've worked out what they would be looking for ideally, you know, you're going to get an easier, quicker response if a student's profile matches exactly what they're asking for. And in many cases, that is the sort of standardized test, the APs and the SAT subject scores and so forth.
Thank you.
Can I ask my question? That's a really quick question.
Is that Lisa again?
It is, I'm sorry.
No, not a problem at all. Please do.
Okay. So you, in the last slide where you showed what I'm calling a concordance slide for the standardized testing that is American students were used to seeing, I didn't see a single one of these in all the schools I just researched for one of my students that applied. Is there, because everybody offers different things, so is one university might say we want to see 3 APs or whatever. There is not a concordance scale, I think you're saying, that sort of everybody in the UK would use. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's probably a kind of a number of universities that group around a similar understanding of equivalences, but each university will have worked out exactly what they want, and they don't have to follow any kind of prescribed requirements, or there's not a national comparison table for international qualifications that everybody has to sign up to and use. So the UK universities have got that complete autonomy to set the equivalents as they see fit, and they use similar guidance, but they'll sometimes interpret that in different ways. And this was really just to give you one example of how one particular university's done it, rather than to say this would give you the guidance that can help you support students apply to lots of different universities.
But the course that you're applying for in any one school could depend, that could influence what they want. So right? So that's why, okay, so we have like an ACT, SAT concordance. That's not going to work for you. You know what I mean? You don't have that same thing, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a sort of general guidance piece, which would often be the full and complete entry requirement for quite a large number of courses, but then there will be certain courses that will say, but one of your subjects that you got that AP score of 4 or 5 in has to be this, and they might start prescribing certain prerequisites and so forth.
Okay,
so it is quite a detailed thing to get to grips with.
Yeah, clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. No, those are great questions. Thank you for both of those sets of questions. But alongside those qualifications, there's another really important element of the application, and this is the sort of personal statement. I mentioned before, students will write one personal statement, and that will go to each of the university choices that they make with their UCAS application. And it's something that universities may differ in terms of how much weighting or importance they give to the personal statement as part of that admissions decision. But it is a very important selection tool for universities that find themselves in that particularly prestigious grouping or top of the league table type position, often for the very simple reason that it's the only real differentiator they have. So I have worked very closely and count him as a good friend and colleague with somebody who is responsible for undergraduate admissions to London School of Economics, for example, and people that apply to London School of Economics are a self-selecting group of quite high academic achievers, and their tutors write them brilliant references. They write great. They have a great set of predicted grades, all sort of A's and A pluses, A stars, and so on. So the personal statement is the only bit that really stands out for a university like LSE, because they don't have interviews and they don't have admissions tests. So it's something that can be quite an important thing for a lot of students applying from the US. And it's part of the UCAS process, and there are certain practical restrictions around that, so which really encourages students to have to be very concise in what they're saying. You can sort of see here character limits and line limits on the application. And as I mentioned before, it's the same personal statement, so they have to really try to avoid being too specific to any one of the choices that they've made. And there's a whole host of things that the universities are looking for with this, and it will depend a little bit on the course that the student has opted for. But they really want to see get a good sense of the student's skills and qualities, and how that's relevant to the specific course. So the student any student you're advising, if they sort of ask, well, how can I go about writing a personal statement? You know, it really has to be quite a tailored thing in many ways to the specific course that they're looking for, to whether that's law or politics or biosciences. They have to have a really good understanding of what those subjects are about and be able to demonstrate their enthusiasm. And yeah, it's quite a short piece, and applicants for very popular courses, you know, their grades will be looked at and so forth, their reference will be looked at, but if the personal statement has some weighting in the admissions decision from the tutor there, you know, that tutor is only human. They're going to have a big pile of those personal statements to read through. We did some work looking at the opening lines used by students. A lot of them use the same kind of words all the time. Ever since I was a young child, I've been fascinated by politics or history or accounting or whatever it might be. So we really try and encourage students to have a strong opening paragraph, something really unique and individual that makes them stand out. One of the things that I appear to have put so much importance on this, I've mentioned it twice, is there's no perfect personal statement. Lots of the admissions tutors I've worked with over the years have said that they're not looking for something formulaic, something which is, you know, copied from a template of how to write a great personal statement. They want to see evidence of who that person is and get a real understanding of them. And sometimes they prefer a bit of an unpolished diamond rather than a really kind of finessed but formulaic approach to something. Honesty is very important, obviously. So, you know, they do reference this against the things that the school teacher has said. But perhaps most importantly to press upon you and for you to advise your students on is that, you know, the whole concept of a rounded person who's got achievements in sports and all kinds of other volunteering and so on under their belt. For UK universities, they nearly all say they want 80% of that personal statement to be really focused on the academic suitability for the course. So whether that's just straight up academics, you know, in terms of what you've learned in the classroom experience, whether it's the extracurricular, supercurricular activities, whether it's something as simple as reflecting on a book you read about astrophysics or something, if that's the kind of course you're applying to. They don't want to see a lot of the extracurricular stuff, which US students more used to a different type of culture might be more inclined to kind of express themselves about the full extent of their achievements and skills. We're running out of time a little bit, so you know, in terms of picking up on the right course and how to advise a student for that, I'm going to defer to your expertise in working with young people and helping them to choose, but really just to try to highlight just one important point from the perspective of helping them to apply to UK universities, and that's that there is a different type of course that's predominant in UK universities, and it's narrower and more specialised than your students might be expecting. So it's really important that they take quite a strong focus on what the course is going to be about, how much choice they have to make elective choices at subsequent years of study. Maybe year one is all prescribed curriculum, but how much freedom do they have to pursue their own area of interest in years 2 and 3 and so on. And also, how is that course going to be assessed? And you know, we know from the courses that we've had listed on UCAS, there can be real variation in both the amount of contact time that a student will have with their lecturer, the professors, the tutors. And just to kind of illustrate that, for business courses, they may spend as little as 12% of their time in lectures or seminars with an academic member of staff from the university, and the rest is all independent study. It might be as high as 44%. And similarly, in terms of the assessment, you know, for an engineering student, they may have projects or assignments or coursework only count for 10% of their full assessment, but it may be as high as sort of 74%. So there's real variation, and I think it really cuts at to the very heart of how students best learn, and they really need to do their research on the individual courses to kind of understand that and pick a course that matches how they think they're more likely to succeed. So again, just to sort of pick up on this and think about the differences here, you know, this personal statement is something that's particularly important for selective universities especially, but overall there's very little concept in a UK admissions sense of holistic admissions or holistic review. You know, there's some contextualized admissions used by a number of universities and colleges, but it's a very different thing, and the focus is much narrower, and it's much more about academic suitability. And many admissions tutors have said to me that it doesn't really, they think it's great if somebody has volunteered, has competed at national, regional level in whatever sport it might be, but it doesn't affect their decision. So that's something to really push home with the students that you're advising. And this, I think, although there's some caveats to this in that liberal arts and joint or combined honours programmes are available in the UK, I think it is linked to the fact that there is this greater specialisation in UK degree programmes. So we have time for some questions. I'm going to spend literally just 30 seconds doing a quick flick through the remaining slides just to show you, and I'll ask colleagues at IECA to make this available to you as a PDF as well, so that the links are live, so you'll be able to follow up and explore these resources in more detail. But UCAS.com has a whole load of stuff to help you advise students, whether it's choosing at the very outset what it is they want to study. You know, we've got careers advice and lots of resources we've developed around that. We've got all these sort of job profiles that link back to the types of course that you need to do to get into that sort of particular area. Personality quizzes, you know, tailored to the particular age group, Myers-Briggs personality type stuff. And then lots of things there for both students and yourselves as those that are advising the students. So look at ucas.com/advisors. Gives you some of these classroom resources or resources to use in one-to-one sessions with your students. You've got all kinds of specialized information and online modules. If you wanted to take, for example, something on personal statements to give you a more detailed grip of that, you can search for that on ucas.com and take that away and hopefully have a stronger chance of giving your students even better support than you currently do already. And finally, if you have trouble at any point when you're supporting an applicant, you know, we've got a dedicated team. They work 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. UK hours. So it might mean a bit of an early start for some of you, particularly on the West Coast, but you know, you've got those resources there. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope that was useful, and we've got a little bit of time left now for questions as well.
It was very useful, and thank you very much. I'm going to throw out a few of the questions that people have typed into their chat boxes, and if we have any time, then we'll open the floor. The first one, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer, but perhaps you can send some resources out to us. One of the attendees would like to know what are some of the best UK universities for students with learning disabilities, particularly dyslexia.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think there are some universities, well, most universities have put a lot of effort into supporting students from a wide range of backgrounds and with a varying range of needs. It is something that's worth looking into. I'm not going to say, oh, this university is particularly strong at that. Partly because I don't know enough about that particular area to be able to recommend in that way. Partly because UCAS is impartial, and we don't sort of recommend one university over another. But it is something that you can enter information about a student's requirements if they have any special requirements to support their success at university. It's best to get those into the application form so that the dedicated student support teams can be alerted to any needs by the admissions teams and arrange well in advance, because the funding comes from different pots than it does for UK students, and it has to be agreed and negotiated with quite a long lead in time. So please do include as much information as you can about that on the application, and be open with the universities to help them help your students the best way.
There's a particular section that can be completed about learning differences or other issues.
That's right, yeah.
Another question that has to do with the invisibility and the equal consideration. One of our members worked with a student this year who was turned down by a course with the reason given that student had been accepted to a similar course at the same university. So the student applied to 2 courses, different courses, but similar at the same university, was turned down for one of them. So they're wondering, how can an applicant know what constitutes boundaries between courses and not just variations?
Yes, I mean, I think that's a good question. I mean, it's difficult to get into specifics without knowing details of individual cases, but universities will have different policies about students applying to more than one course at the same institution. And within the UCAS application, a choice means a course, and we don't restrict. We don't say you can only apply to one course per university. It's rarely done for obvious reasons, but technically within what the UCAS application allows a student to do, they could choose all 5 of their choices at the same university. Not advised, but technically possible. Some universities will essentially allow each department to sort of do as they will. If the individual department wants the student, they make that decision themselves, and a student could get an offer from each of the courses that they've applied to at the same university. Other universities will have a policy based more on trying to help them do a sort of best informed estimate of the numbers they're likely to receive at the beginning of the academic year. So they will sort of make the outcome look more like your colleague had with the student they supported. I think if for example you've got courses that are variations of the same type of program, in the sense that it's a shared core compulsory module selection that students would take on both courses, and it's really only the elective choice and perhaps what dissertation or thesis subject they take on that gives the differentiation. So you might have international relations and sociology, or international relations and politics, and if a student applied to both of those, if they'd really looked into the curriculum, they might see that they are essentially the same course and run by the same department and involve 70% of the same taught modules. So that would most likely give rise to that kind of situation. By the same measure, if a student's applying for very different types of course at the same institution, they have to be able to explain that in their personal statement. So it is a difficult one to be absolutely prescriptive on. I think advising a student to, if they're really interested in a particular university, they're able to apply for 2 courses, but they do run the risk of getting that kind of reaction. But from another university, they may get a different reaction. I guess the individual has to decide whether it's worth the risk of being rejected for one of their choices to make that initial application.
So I have quite a few more questions. Can you give us another 5 minutes or so?
Absolutely, not a problem at all.
Okay.
This is getting me out my children's bedtime, so I'm happy to stay for a little while longer. So
I knew it was late for you. Thank you.
not at all.
All right. So for schools not used to the UCAS prediction requirements, would the referee, receive any guidance or questions about including predicted grades?
I don't know. There is some guidance on UCAS.com for tutors that are giving predicted grades. I think it's something that your members at IECA would perhaps be able to help with in terms of making sure they understood that sort of system and how it works. Essentially, what we're looking for from tutors is a realistic assessment of where they think the student is going to finish up their studies at. They're not looking for, they don't expect everybody to be accurate all the time, but the universities do know from the research we've done with predicted grades that 40% of predicted grades ended up being higher, than the grades achieved, and only 10% of predicted grades in the past have ended up being lower than the grade achieved. So generally, universities are a little wary of the fact that they think tutors often try to give their students the best possible chance. And I think the best thing to do is to get teachers who are working directly with the students to give us an honest appraisal of the outcome they expect the students to get grades wise. And if they've got earlier grades that they can base that on, if they can evidence that, then that's fine. If it's a school that has been a bit more used to predicting grades and they've sent lots of students to the UK, if they're able to work up some statistics of their own, which they can mention in the reference to say, we tend to find that we have a X percentage accuracy rate with predicted grades, or other contextual information such as this student consistently performs in the top 5% of the class. Something like that in the reference can really help round out and contextualize predicted grades, which I appreciate can be quite difficult for some people to provide. But I think being honest and giving that honest appraisal of what is expected of the student is the best approach for a teacher to take.
Okay. Why do some programs require a foundational year, even if the student is in an international school?
Yeah, so you may find that some universities, particularly if they've got elements around either the arts courses, if there's a creative element, then often the students might be required to take a foundation year if the assessment at the admission stage has been that the student has shown good promise, but they need to have a stronger foundation to work up on in terms of some of those creative or practical skills. Then it's not so much a judgment on the equivalence of their academic qualifications so much, but it's making sure that the student's starting off at the right point from a kind of technical ability. In other areas, particularly around STEM, there may be, from the overall assessment that somebody's made of the student's academic background, that they've perceived there are some weaknesses in certain aspects of the students, and maybe there's elements of quantitative theory that the students have not achieved at the sort of at a consistent level with the rest of their grades and their overall grades. And for programs like engineering or other STEM subjects, they may have a couple of different reasons why they'd want the students to take a foundation. One might be that they would want there to be absolute certainty the student is on the right level to be able to then take them through a very fast-paced, demanding undergraduate course. The other might be linked to professional body requirements, which they, if you're running an engineering program that's got accreditation from one of the professional bodies, they tend to not take any kind of chances with regard to making sure all students absolutely 100% meet the entry criteria, but also minimize the chance of dropout and students not being successful on the course by getting them to have that solid foundation provided by an access course or an international foundation program as a preparation, an additional preparation for that.
That's a great answer. So another couple of questions that have to do with qualifications. Could a U.S. student be admissible to some of the not as selective universities if they have a GED, a general education diploma, versus a high school diploma? Have you ever seen that?
Yes, I mean, I spent a long time working in international student recruitment admissions for different universities before joining UCAS. Unfortunately, I am probably not an expert on US qualifications per se. But I think I have seen in some of the universities that where they've listed specific entry criteria, and a small number of them I did notice the GED was listed, because I tried to pull out as many different examples as I could. I think I mentioned in the presentation that a less selective, for want of a better term, university had looked for GPA of 2.8 and ACT score of 24 or above. And I think that university had also had a number of variations which they accepted, including the GED. There's a lot of competition for student recruitment at the moment in the UK, particularly given that the number of UK students is decreasing every year, and international students are recognised as an important way of universities maintaining the health of and well-being of certain courses and their overall numbers. So there is a lot of flexibility from some universities. I think it's very much worth making the inquiry of a particular university, and I have seen that as an accepted profile for some universities.
Thank you. One of our members who's in China would like to know, would a Chinese high school graduate with 3 or more AP scores of 4 or above, or SAT subject scores of 650 or above, or whatever it is the school that the university is requiring, be eligible to apply?
So this is somebody who's in China who would have followed the national curriculum, but then taken these as additional. I tend to think my answer would tend to be yes, probably. It would vary from university to university. Obviously, if they've taken something like Gaokao or Huikao and so on from the Chinese school system, for a lot of universities that typically does require a foundation year to be taken. But then it may be that if they've achieved the relevant qualifications in terms of those standardized tests, that would be acceptable. But I think it would vary from university to university. So without sort of being too much of a fence sitter on this one, I'd say I'd probably refer that particular applicant, because it's quite a detailed set of conditions and circumstances, to ask the question of the university that they're interested in particular.
Mark, can I ask you about there's another question about the reference letters. Would a reference letter from an educational consultant, a member of IECA, be considered as an equivalent reference letter as an academic from a high school?
The reference letter can come from anybody that knows the student. I think it would need to, if it weren't the more conventional setup of it being a teacher that has taught or knows the student from that educational setting, I think that would need to be spelled out very clearly, in terms of in what capacity does the referee know the student. I think there probably isn't a hugely detailed understanding of the role of independent education consultants on the part of UK universities. The UK universities understand the concept of an education agent who might work for a for-profit commercial organisation. They may although I appreciate the differences in terms of how an independent education consultant would work compared to an agent, that may not always be something that's appreciated and understood on the part of UK universities, and they may sort of think that there's a conflict of interest if it helps the independent education consultant to have the student gain entry to that particular university. They may see that as a conflict of interest in the same way that they wouldn't accept a reference from an education agent.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have a few more questions, but I don't want to keep you. I know you want to go home. It's after hours for you. Could I send them on to you? Would you mind?
Absolutely. You know, I'm so pleased that there's been such a strong interest. I apologise for being so verbose in the presentation, not leaving enough time for questions at the end. But if you send me through a list, I'll do my best to kind of get answers out to you by the end of this week, so you can circulate those to your members.
That would be great. Thank you so much for your time and for the presentation. It was very informative and helpful. We really appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you ever so much for your time and attention for all colleagues that attended. Much appreciated from my side too. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good evening.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.